introduction about myself and where some provocations around this concept of platform theory and platformization. We'll go around the room and likewise offer up a chance for each of you to introduce yourselves, as well as state either where you stand around these topics or where your research may fit within these topics. And don't feel any pressure to be an expert. A lot of us are still working through some of these concepts. And then we're going to actually then turn to Stuart Cunningham, who's going to sort of lay the groundwork and give us some frameworks and some ideas to debate and discuss. After that, I have a number of prompts that we've discussed as well, and we'll then open it up, of course, to the room. And without any further ado, my name is David Craig, and I do want to take this moment to mention how great it is to be reunited with my co-authors of our book on Wanghong and social media entertainment in China. We met in 2018, came up with the book, and never met again because of a little pandemic you all would have known about. So our book came out during the pandemic. This is the first time the three of us have had a chance to be reunited, so it's terrific. And there are a lot of people on this stage who I think we're all indebted to and want to show great. And thank you, of course, also to CUHK for hosting this. But I'm a professor, associate professor at the University of Southern California in the Annenberg School of Communication. And I'm also a visiting scholar at Harvard at the Berkman Klein Center, and I'm currently a global Fulbright scholar studying creator cultures in the Global South. But I want to look at reference back to a concept that we brought up in the Wanghong book, where we described platform nationalism, and just mention something with regards to what I'm referring to as the TikTokalypse that is playing out around the world. In our book about Chinese creator culture, we describe the impending TikTokalypse as platform nationalism, and it pains me to admit that we were right. Platform nationalism refers to an array of multilateral power struggles between global tech and venture capital, including their lobbying interests, legitimate concerns over cyber sovereignty, exacerbated by manipulated fears cultivated in the tech flesh, the rise of and exploitation of populist political movements, regardless of political system, accompanied by racist xenophobia, the repetition of 20th century Cold War patterns, and the impending balkanization of the internet, with creators comprising expendable canaries in the global coal mines of platform capitalism, and the disenfranchisement of an entire platform generation who rely upon these technologies as vital means of expression, engagement, and communication, and have little cause to ever believe their governments truly care about their lives. That was obviously a Twitter-based provocation. I was definitely doing it for the likes. But platform nationalism arose out of our increasing awareness of these impending collisions between these platform systems from the US and China. But it relies upon an understanding that a lot of platform theory that has emerged also has emerged in those separate systems and around those different camps. And I want to offer up a few just very, very brief thoughts on this concept of platformization, in many ways informed by the field work that I've just done over the last month and a half in Southeast Asia. One is that the platform world is not flat, neither technologically or nationally. It's particularly important that we recognize the critical affordances of social media platforms. These are vital to maintain social structures. They're not just fueling multi-sided networks or a means for engaging in cultural production. Social media and e-commerce platforms are not American or Western. If anything, they're becoming more Chinese, including commercial affordances, content moderation, and social control. The platform world does not align with the center-peripheral model of global media. Rather, it demands closer attention to local, national, regional, and cultural linguistic differences. The governance of the platform world is not limited to the state or the corporation, but ought to account for human agency. And again, I refer back to our work around creators in particular, as I call them the canaries in the coal mines, the global platform wars. caught between the emerging contestations between two platform systems heading towards collision and advancing the prospect of the splinternet, or rather one world, two systems. On that provocation, I'm going to hand it around to Haiqing and let you go from there.
Well, thanks, David, for the provocation. I come from a different background. When looking at platform studies, platform theory, what I'm sharing today, different background meaning that my research has always been focused on Chinese language, digital media, communication, and culture. But increasingly, I have moved my research focus from China per se to Chinese language media globally, particularly in Australia and Asia Pacific. And now what I'm sharing today is based on my recent research on Chinese digital transactions in Southeast Asia. I'm focusing on Southeast Asia because of the necessity of COVID lockdown, in the last 3 years. So I then started to make trips to Southeast Asia and talk to colleagues in Southeast Asia to find out, how Chinese digital presence and the influence has been felt and interpreted locally. This is also in the context of the global TikTok war and also the potential ban of TikTok and WeChat in Australia and the US, etc. So I'm going to share just a couple of points. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. Sorry, my name is Haiqing Yu. I'm a professor of media communication from RMIT University and organizer of this, one of the organizers of this conference. Anyway, so a couple points to share. One is about what David has talked about, the kind of platform nationalism and the trend to decenter US-centered platform theories, or what other people would call the Americanizing platform studies. So this is the trend that we have seen among scholars and students in the last few years already. We've seen the trend from the center to periphery, but what I'm talking about the center and the periphery doesn't necessarily mean the superpowers. So when we talk about platforms or AIs or automated decision-making technologies and systems, people tend to look at big powers, like Li Kai-Fu's book, AI superpowers, right? But we need to look at beyond those centers, whether it's US or China, to look at the periphery. The periphery that may not be the periphery for the new trends, new cultures, and new styles, new transactional patterns, such as Southeast Asia. That's why I'm looking at it. And what is the periphery, the traditionally periphery innovating will be, maybe deciding for what we know about platforms. That's one point. The second point is about platforms. Platforms, as consumers, we always look at the consumer platforms. However, we know the consumer platforms are only the tip of the iceberg. And increasingly, we have lots of people, including our keynote speaker today, Ned Rosita, have always been writing about the infrastructure, logistics networks, etc. And then now lots of people talking about, the 5G networks, the cable under the sea and satellite over sky. All the infrastructure, hardware, from hardware to software, etc., big data centers, etc. All these are the different layers of platform infrastructure and the structure that we need to look into. That is looking beyond the tip of the iceberg to look at what is behind, what is invisible. Just like when we look at digital labor, instead of just looking at what is visible, we advocating that we look at the invisible digital labor, the ones that sustain the digital platforms and the transactional cultures. So thirdly, I wanted to point out the trend from the study of platforms from the national to the transnational. So we all know the platformized transactions are global in nature. Although we may think about, say, for example, TikTok as a Chinese platform, but TikTok was never made from day one was never made for the Chinese market. Even though its founder is Chinese and is was headquartered in Beijing, but it is global short video sharing platform. Similarly, when you look at those digital transaction platforms in Southeast Asia, from Lazada to Shopee, suddenly forgot the in Vietnam, not Line. Anyway, so they are all local, original digital transaction platforms with Chinese investment and US backup as well. So what do you call them? So they are not Chinese, they're not American, they are local. And then, but again, if you look at who are the Lazada, for example, is it Chinese because Alibaba bought it? Okay, but people call Lazada as an overseas outreach, overseas arm of Alibaba. However, Lazada's focus is Southeast Asia. They're headquartered in Singapore, but so far it's the biggest e-commerce platform in the region. So Chinese, what is Chinese? Chinese is never a geographically defined concept, particularly considering the long history of Chinese immigration to Southeast Asia and the Chinese cultural influence in the region. I have more, but I'm going to just, for the time's sake, I'm going to just focus on just the last one is about how the local response to platforms when the so-called superpowers and also regional powers like Japan and Korea go to Southeast Asia. What are the local players do with them? How do they take advantage of those external, international platforms? So people used to, from the Cold War perspective, you look at their strategies as a hedging kind of strategy, but I view them as grabbing strategy. So they enjoyed the advantage of latecomer and of being latecomer. So when the Chinese transaction platforms go to Southeast Asia, they take advantage so-called the time machine travel, because in terms of infrastructure, cultural, and technology, Southeast Asian platforms are about 10 years or more behind the Chinese ecosystem. And then, however, when you work with them, when I talk to the tech practitioners, and they also learn. They told me it's not just about them teaching the local people what to do. It's about them learning how to do international communication and how to adjust locally. The localization strategy, of course, kicking, but it's more than globalization. So for the local players, grabism, which we always use to describe Chinese Shanzhai culture, actually can be used to describe the hybridization process that local players have taken when they utilize the US technologies and the Chinese infrastructure power to build their own digital power and the digital presence in the region. So I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, Haiqing, and thank you so much for organising today and everything that you put into this wonderful event. And thanks, David, for the invitation to be here. So I'm Ramon Lobato. I'm a associate professor at RMIT. I'm not an expert on the Chinese internet, but I'm very interested in comparative approaches to platforms, and I guess interested in what you might say the geography of platforms. So I've done a bit of work on video platforms and the in particular video on demand, subscription video on demand platforms. So what I'll say today comes out of those research projects. I'll just talk about two aspects of those projects in particular. So the first was a project that I did with a bunch of colleagues on Netflix and on the internationalization of Netflix. And so this started as a group of interested scholars interested in, I guess, what was happening to Netflix as it was entering different markets around the world, and how it was responding to those markets, how those markets were responding to Netflix, as Haiqing said then, the kind of local innovations and attachments and the reorganization of those audiovisual ecologies that was taking place with the entry of this very high-profile platform into those, or portal into those markets. And over time, we started documenting what was happening in each of our respective countries. And then we kind of built a research network out of that called the Global Internet TV Consortium. So from that little experiment, which was a kind of group of friends and scholars wanting to compare notes, we built a really interesting comparative project to try to understand what happens to different audiovisual systems when you have a big profile, a high-profile platform like Netflix enter, and what happens to that platform as it changes and internationalizes, and as it absorbs the learnings from all of those international ventures. And then we were kind of from that also able to build a bit of a chronology of the kind of adventures of Netflix around the world, and also to understand, as David said, that platform geographies are never flat. So the Netflix that one experiences in Australia or Thailand or France is very, very different from each other and from the home territory. So from that kind of insight, that got us thinking about, well, how do we theorize platforms, and how do we compare platforms more generally, and what are we talking about when we're talking about a platform? Is it the home market experience, or is it one of the international instantiations of that platform? What's the kind of ontology of the platform and the stability and instability of platforms? So all of those questions were very interesting, and that kind of gave us a lot of conceptual work to do, and in the work that I did on Netflix after that gave me a lot of ideas to kind of work through in the book Netflix Nations. And then the other thing I'll just mention briefly that I've been working on that might be relevant to this conversation is what Haiqing mentioned before too, which is the kind of hardware layer of video services. So in recent years, I've been doing a project about smart TVs as distribution platforms, which entails thinking about the hardware of the smart TV and the software and the operating system layers. So that's taken me into the kind of more infrastructural questions around video distribution and hardware, and that's been very instructive as well too. So that kind of impulse of moving down the stack, you might say, from services down to devices has been very interesting. So I might reflect on that as well too as we go.
Okay, thank you, Ramon. Hi, so my name is Wenjia Tang from University of Sydney. I'm a PhD student from the Department of Media and Communication, and today I'm sharing how the platformization brings changes into the content distribution and production, especially in the media entertainment industry. And I will continue your localized strategy of Netflix doing in their overseas markets, but with another model about Tencent Video, how the streaming service from Tencent Group, the overseas version named the VTV, and how it brings changes to the localized content strategy to the Chinese market and experiences to the overseas cases. So I'm looking at Tencent Video, the overseas version VTV in Thailand as a case. Tencent, as you know, is normally recognized as a tech company and is known for the business innovation super app. The super app means the integration of diverse online services into one single multi-functional platform, illustrating the comprehensive digital ecosystem that enhance user engagement and cross-service synergy. And usually these strategic all-in-one services are used to describe WeChat as an industrial and also social entertainment, or functional services in one platform from the Tencent Group. But I also think this super app model can be perceived differently in different industrial contexts, and it stands out for the Chinese internet logic. And for example, in the culture and creative industry, Tencent has a blueprint named Pan Entertainment. This Pan Entertainment blueprint is proven to be a version of super app, but it only works for the digital content services and business. So the concept of Pan Entertainment summarizes a version where intellectual property IP, majorly we are talking about copyrights and artistic creative outputs circulate across transmedia ecosystem and fostering innovation and maintaining a competitive edge to the market for Tencent. Well, people see Tencent's media ecosystem as a river, so the IPs and creative from this, they form the source from in the subsidiary like China Literature, Wenjia Tang, and Tencent Animation and Comics. And the production process represent to the mainstream. That means Tencent Video, where Tencent Video stands, and Penguin Pictures, Tencent Picture, the production house Tencent owns. And for the downstream, they are the content promotion and distribution. For example, TME, Tencent Music Entertainment Groups, and Maoyan, which is a movie ticket selling apps. Among them, Tencent Video is central and at the center of the ecosystem because it's where IP adoptions are selling not only to the audiences but also to the advertisers, to the market, and to the third-party partners. And Tencent Video is the most subscribed streaming services in China. If you don't know, it has now more than 122 million subscribers domestically and about 47 million subscribers internationally. And it's also the fourth largest subscribed streaming services in the world, following Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, and Disney Plus. It's the only one in top 10 non-Western. So thinking about Tencent Video, they probably be embarking with the going out policy, 走出去, the policy and increase, and also think about the market drive. The increasingly international findings, capital, and audience base are driving them to think about transforming not only from a Chinese and national-based streaming services or creative media company, but also to attract national services. So Tencent Video now, VTV, born out of Tencent Video, just like TikTok to Douyin. VTV is a version. It's an international version of Tencent Video. It brings out 50% of Chinese catalog in the overall library, and most of them are licensed from Tencent, so the IP Tencent holds. And other 50% are made up for the international corporations, and also from the supports from the Tencent's partners in mostly the Southeast Asian countries. So among the all localized project, one particular genre named the Y series Yaoyi stands out. It is a Thailand localized queer drama stripped romance of young male, which have become the key product on Tencent Video, VTV's plan, and important cultural experts to the platform in order to the international markets. In 2022, the Bangkok Post used Asian Falls in Love with Thai Boys Love as a headline, and 1 year later, The Economics asked, are Thailand gay TV drama the next K-pop? So we can see the news release described the transnational and cross-cultural appeals of Y series as a genre and cultural experts at the heart of the Thailand cultural expression. And VTV is a key distributing channel, one of the key distributing channel, and Chinese capital is behind this popularity. So the core of VTV strategy involves globalization, a blend of global standard, global operation, global distribution with localized culture, content, and production. And this approach has been crucial to VTV's success, allowing it to deliver not only the Chinese but also the more diverse content to the world, to the world's audience, just like what Netflix is doing in Australia and in Thailand and in other countries. But what is interesting is that the Thai local producers saw VTV as a good business opportunity because they also want the channel to sell their TV production and films to the outside world, and Netflix doesn't give them much chance. If you look at the local, so Australia have about like 2 or 3% of local titles in Netflix overall libraries. If you look at Thailand, the number is lower. So if you are Thai local producer and you want to reach out to the international audiences, instead of reaching out to the production house one by one, as a good example is to sell your copyrights and the license to Tencent Video, to VTV, and it will be accessed by for now, more than 120 countries. including Australia and New Zealand. So for the local producer, it's a good business opportunity, and they don't think it's like Chinese capital getting into the way of their content production, but they think of as a supportive way to reach for the broader, wider audience base. But for the Netflix case, we are asking, are we really welcome foreign capital to do the cultural production and make the decision on what should be produced and what should be released to the audience? Now the Thai producer and Thai market are not asking the question, but I think there will be the future challenge. And for the time, one thing I want to emphasize is about the platform's ability as function as a cultural intermediacy, because it also highlights Tencent's potential for monetize cultural assets. That's how they call the IP they hold, cultural assets. So based on the popularity of Y drama in the market, in Thai market, and international market, so the queer series, TV series is highly censored in the Chinese market. One the interview with local producers, Chinese local producers, screenwriters, filmmakers, they said they have initiated some project with Tencent, but those projects were cancelled by the censorship. But those kind of TV genre were proven to be highly profitable in the Chinese market. So Tencent think if we cannot do the business in China, we can do the business elsewhere. The Thailand is where they pick up as a destination and also as a center of production. And they are really doing the business well, not only in Thai market, but in Mexico, in Brazil, in Japan, and South Korea, which is, I think, really fascinating to think about how the Chinese capital is working through the cultural creative system. And people don't know much about how VTV is involving in this procedure. This is why I think it's interesting to bring that out. So Tencent is not just a tech company to me. It bridges cultures and tech assets and features together. The characteristic of Tencent Group and VTV, which have the cross-subsidiary support and inter-industrial organization as industrial chain, can bring the Tencent's feature not only as super app like WeChat, but can entertainment blueprint for the digital content business, which I think is the Chinese logic of platformization. Thank you.
Oh, it's me. Thank you, David. Thank you, Haiqing, for organizing this conference. My name is Lin Jian, or Jian Lin. I'm an assistant professor from Chinese University of Hong Kong. I'm actually recently working on this idea of platformization from China, which is closely related to Haiqing and Wenjia just talked about. The idea came from our Wang Hong book, the final chapter about globalization. And so last year we published a special issue on media culture and society called TikTok and platformization from China. And in that special issue, we developed this, or we tried to write about this idea why. So aside from all these geopolitical tensions, anxieties, what else can we do? What else can we talk about? And also, how can we either dissolve or ease a little bit of those geopolitical anxieties? And so then, my question with all these Chinese internet companies or platforms going global becomes not just about the kind of political economy or the whole global geopolitical tensions or attention given to Chinese companies, but also what they actually really bring to the global either creators or business partners, but also what they bring to local Chinese creators and also Chinese small business owners, but especially in terms of digital culture. Can we really identify some unique distinction in terms of culture, in terms of platform specificities? So these are the questions I have been exploring. And then we wrote this piece about TikTok in particular, try to tease out, try to explain the platform logics, especially the algorithmic kind of moderation of content, what that means to individual users. And from there, I encountered a concept called algorithmic cosmopolitanism. I found very interesting. It kind of relates to the concept David mentioned at the beginning called platform nationalism. So if we only look at geopolitics, we only look at the kind of pay attention to the ownership of those platforms, then apparently China is the pioneer in advancing or practicing the idea of platform nationalism. But if we look at really like the platform logics or digital culture and also transnational business practice, we realize maybe they're not so distinctive in the way they operate, in the way they apply these different technologies to users, to different business partners, practitioners. So then, and also especially think about culture, think about how algorithm, maybe the same case with Netflix, how algorithms become so central in the entire, not just business operation, but also cultural moderation. Then how this very flattened ideology of cosmopolitanism has been claimed, has been played out by these platforms, not just Chinese, but also Netflix, YouTube, other platforms. So in that sense, maybe I'll just stop here to focus more to emphasize not just about how the geopolitical anxiety linked to the whole financial ownership of these Chinese companies, but also the continuity, the similarity between these so-called two systems or three systems or multiple systems. So I'll stop here.
Okay, well, I'm going to take you back in time. Think about where the platform debate has come from, and I think that its major predecessor was the media globalization, the media imperialism, global imperialism, globalization debates, which were very wide-ranging. They were very multidisciplinary. They took place really from the 60s through to the 1990s. And there I think the major analytical paradigms that precede but strongly influence the global platform debates of our times. And there are various people in the 1990s and 2000s, including me, particularly in the book New Patterns in Global Television that I did with John Sinclair and Liz Jacker. We were people working in that field attempted to deliver the debate from the discipline's Western centrism by arguing that the UNESCO hardline media imperialism thesis, the one-way flow idea of the 1960s and 1970s, was contested with what one of the contributors called the patchwork quilt idea. So it was one-way flow versus the patchwork quilt. Now, what was involved there was the usual story that we're familiar with of contesting a story of dominance to avoid the victor-victim binary and giving the periphery a counter-narrative that the empire or the periphery can strike back, fitted into a wider sense of the agency of subaltern populations. And with respect to that book, there's a fun fact I want to share with you, and that is we thought we'd come up with a really killer title, Peripheral Vision. But Oxford University Press wouldn't allow us to use that title because they thought that the book would be put into the library under ophthalmology or optometry. So we had to go with the more boring statemental title, New Patterns in Global Television. But they thought kindly on us and they stuck peripheral vision after the colon, which is exactly where you shouldn't be putting it. So that's so much for, sexy academic titles. So what's the difference between those decades which gave rise to the media imperialism versus globalization debates, or the one-way flow versus the patchwork quilt, and today? Well, at the risk of seeming obvious, but I'm asking you to kind of reflect on a couple of decades, or several decades really, of debate in this field by making these remarks. I think there are two fundamental ways in which it's different. We're in an age grappling, like the previous era, with US owned and originated companies, but they're much, much bigger companies by capex than the Western media entertainment and information hegemons of yesteryear, the ones we like to call legacy media today. The so-called platform age is distinctive by that sheer size, but the size is a product of the scope. The size is the product of the scope. These platforms have extended tentacles stretching across a structurally converging media landscape. Public policy and academic distinctions across the entertainment infosphere or entertainment news divide, which was a significant feature, that distinction was a significant feature of the earlier debates, are now more difficult to keep separate, thus making the analytical and the regulatory challenges significantly greater, I think. So, you know, the so-called tech giants are bigger and more influential, but they run platforms. That is, stages on which, they stage a great deal more horizontal peer-to-peer communication than the old paradigm of vertical so-called one-way flow. It's no longer one-way flow, and it's not even patchwork quilt. I struggled as I thought through this, what the third metaphor might sound like, and this is not so great, but it's like a mammoth audio-visual tent that we all live within now. So the platform age is one where the technology base, the business models, and the societal impact of platforms are very much different from the old debates. So that's the first fundamental way. The second fundamental way is, of course, China. China has represented itself, even in a few years into the Xi Jinping era, as part of the flying geese model of development that Michael Keane's written so well about within China media studies. The flying geese model, learning from Japan and the West, stereotypically patient, guided by civilizational thinking, driven by millennia of continuity. That's the stereotype. But the strategic world historical reality is that the emergence of China has been spectacularly rapid and has upended paradigms and positions. It's been spectacularly rapid. It's worth thinking, just musing on that for a while as you think of the last 50 years of debates. And I want to illustrate that by talking about what I think was one of the major pieces of work from 25 years ago, the book Decentering Media Studies. I'll just say a couple of points about it, edited by James Curran and Moon-Jin Park, published in 2000. Now, Curran and Park's book is a systematic attempt to dismantle media studies Occidentalism. But China barely rates a mention in their introduction, where they set out their claims for analytical and empirical superiority over landmark work of the 1950s, such as Four Theories of the Press. Their move was to offer a greater sense of difference and variability, quote unquote, more patchwork quilt than one-way flow. So far, so good. But China is considered to belong in this book to a category called transitional and mixed societies, sharing this framework with Eastern Europe after communism, Russia, the Middle East, and South America. Now, that was plausible in the Cold War days of BRIC-style non-alignment, but I don't think that it really operated even at that time, and certainly not since. So Eric Ma's chapter on China in the book is one themed by the encouragement of media commercialization, entrepreneurial improvisation, and even uneven liberalization. So what stands out 25 years on, I think, is China's singular drive to spectacularly rapidly cease to fly in formation with the other geese, especially that ragtag assemblage Curran and Park called transitional and mixed societies. it seeks to soar with the eagle, and of course, the US is the eagle. It's a spectacularly different media world that we live in, that was charted at that time by Curran and Park. Thanks, David. And thank you very belatedly again for your wonderful organisation of this.
Absolutely. A round of applause for Haiqing.
Over many, many years.
Well, rather beautifully and poignantly, rather than launching the conversation, we're going to end up actually winding up the conversation, which is to say, let's not remember where we came from before we start to continue to challenge these notions of a global platform theory or a bifurcated, splintered platform theory, or, and I'd like to pay respect to experts like Wilfred Wong, who've spoken really brilliantly about the dual platform theories and the way in which the systems are now rupturing and reforming in different ways. I think I'd like to see this panel as a provocation for all of us to challenge the westernized notions of platformization, maybe even engage with, to an even further callback to Southern theory of how platformization in Southeast Asia demands of us that we start to entertain another or third way of conjuring and imagining the way in which these logics and these power dynamics are playing out. I think we'll just open it up to the room for the last 4 minutes, if for no other reason than I love to play Oprah. Do we have any questions in the room that you'd like to pose to the panel? Hands, please. Hands, please. Comments? Or comments, of course. You're going to have comments anyway. So yeah, that's how all the conferences work. Comments, please. I get to run. It's my only cardio. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, Allegra, Fonda Bonardi in the Michigan in the back. Hi. I'm wondering, so we're supposed to be decentering platforms, we're supposed to be unthinking and rethinking. What do each of you think is the new concept that is getting us the most stuck on our way to rethinking these things? Is there something new that is distracting us or clouding our thinking as a community that you think also needs to be eroded on the way to solving these methodological questions? Thank you.
I'll start to say that we tend to think of these as fixed states and not dynamic fields. I think of platforms as dynamic fields and constant mitigation and negotiation with each other through both the political economy and the cultural labor management and practices that are occurring across these platforms. In equal measure, they are shaping the way in which these platforms themselves work as much as the platforms are shaping the way in which culture and communication and media operates. That would be my argument, to a little throwback to some French theory while we're at it. So, any thoughts?
I would say AI. Or any other new terms that will come up in the next 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years. I would like to just refer to Stuart's comment, the role of history. Go back to history, because whatever you think is new have already happened previously, although in different terms and in different terms of references. But the logic, the fundamental human logic, is the same. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a fascinating question. And I think I would say that the analytical risk is to impose a false coherence on the platform if we're talking about transnational platforms that operate in dispersed ways globally. We have to say, in what sense is this a consistent entity versus being a collection of different national services tied together through billing, through brand? And that will vary from platform to platform, but for a lot of video services, they're actually fundamentally quite different operations. Something like Uber, for example, or many different transport services, the regulatory context of the platforms in each of those countries will mean that they operate quite differently. The workforces, the labour, the pricing, all of them fundamentally differentiate them from each other. So sometimes I think it's helpful to talk about a platform. Other times we have to kind of disaggregate that.
Thank you. Firstly, I agree with Haiqing that nothing is fundamentally new. If you look back to the television studies like 50, 40 years ago, while we are talking about online or video on demand, it's repeatedly the dialogues from the early historical debates on why the localized or global content should be like circulated through the platform. And another thing from the media industry perspective, I think the number one in the market will set up standards, and the follow-up will follow their standards or repeat their standards. So it's challenging for the newcomer to like establish something rare because it's less acceptable for the audiences, for the market. This is why I'm thinking of if you are the leader of the market and you set up standards, patterns, frameworks for the industrial, and other people are just repeating, there's nothing new happening. So I think that's a challenge for me. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for the question. I actually don't have any new exciting concepts to give you. I'm also eager to learn, but I'll share some personal struggle with the concepts we already have, like platform. I think this is really becomes quite empty in the sense that everything digital, everything works online, combining or connective seems to become a platform. But if we return to the very early, not very early, like early definition of what defines a platform, either technically or in terms of business, in terms of discourse, then today many things maybe seem a little bit dubious, like TikTok, that never opens up its own API to the public. And how can we define it as a like computationally as a platform? And also in terms of there's another word, globalization, which I also found very difficult to engage with these days. There is a lot of, well, already, if we look at the history of writing, of scholarship, dozens of books talking about globalization, rethinking globalization. But what does this concept still mean today, if anything? And of course, in terms of the practice, every company in China now, they're eager to go global, and I don't know, like a lot of debates going on in the US, in Europe about how to decouple with China, right? So in that sense, are we still living in a globalized world, and how can we still engage with these relatively old concepts? That's just, maybe we need a new concept, I don't know.
All right. Yes.
Thank you, everyone, for this very inspiring panel. I have a question for Haiqing. You mentioned some Southeast Asian countries have applied algorithm to develop their local digital transaction platforms. Chinese model, Chinese technologies or platforms are part of what they have grabbed to develop their local or innovate their local technologies. So I wondered, what are the attitudes of the Chinese government or Chinese digital giants towards their grabbing them? So if this could be seen as a success of Chinese model or technologies going overseas, they should be happy about the outcome. But you also mentioned that this has proven that it is a failure of China as a digital superpower in influencing other countries. So I wondered if you could clarify this a bit. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. I think my premise was different from yours because I started from the decentralizing platform studies perspective. When I say decentralized, decentering, I'm also decentering China, decentering Chinese government, decentering CCP. I do not look at platform studies, as if it's always under the iron hand of an invisible power that we call CCP or the Chinese government. So I think if you look at everything from that perspective, you give too much credit to that invisible hand. And then we also need to look at the local agency and also the contrast between rhetoric and reality. So on paper, in rhetoric, in public, all the platform companies would always say that what they are doing is in line with the Digital Silk Road initiative. In reality, when you talk to them in private, when they trust you enough, they tell you they don't give a shit about it. Okay, they say where the businesses are because they are all invested by international stakeholders, including those in Japan and the US. So in terms of financial networks, and whether they are Chinese networks or platform companies or American platform companies, you see, look at their investors, they share a very similar portfolio. And then when they are, of course, the Chinese model, like the super app model, etc., have been borrowed by Southeast Asian platform companies. Well, similarly, these kind of things that China have done in the past. So China was known as the copycat nation, right? So now China is trying to, say, hey, we do have, as Michael has written, created in China, not just copied to China. Similarly, we see kind of a similar dynamic happening in Southeast Asia. And we also see in history how latecomers can always overcome the so-called the big guys. Think about Facebook overtaking MySpace, Shopee overtaking Lazada, in the Chinese context, Pinduoduo's attack on Taobao, for example, right? So the world is not static; it's always changing, always moving. And I wanted to look at. That's why don't worry about. Well, you look at the big guys, what they're doing, but also wanted to look at the periphery, the smaller guys, and then what kind of innovations they are doing to their own capacity to increase their own digital capacity. Not always coming from the top down, the geopolitical lenses, but also come to look at the human infrastructure and the invisible forces, there's dynamic forces within the region. I think they will tell you a lot about what will happen in the sphere. Thanks.
Last question, I think. There we go. Last question.
Yes. Thank you for the talk and panel. I'll be very concise and quick. It can be a comment or a question because we're talking about decentering or de-westernizing because the other cultures never in the center of the discussion and in the center of the theories, in a sense. Are we saying from one monopoly led from Netflix to another monopoly of Tencent or other Chinese model? Or are we encouraging localized companies invested by local investors or
Anyone want to discuss TikTok controlling interest of Tokopedia? Oh, sorry, never mind. Let's leave it. Any thoughts? What about the local, the regional even?
I'll let it go. Well, yeah, I mean, I think part of our job is to kind of analyze and describe things as they occur, and that will always be a mix of, top-down power and bottom-up creativity and everything like that. And just with video services, we're seeing both. We're seeing, very large multinational platforms, multi-territory platforms, and national services emerging in response, offering something different, normally more local content, that kind of thing, local language content. But the structural challenges for those smaller services are really significant, and unless they're backed by local media conglomerates or by the state, they often don't survive very long too. So that's something we've been seeing in our, kind of research over time with the consortium, that there's been, very high rate of attrition for those smaller services. So, but having said that, there's also ways in which the global services can be more cosmopolitan than and more culturally, progressive in many ways than the national services, which are often populist and which are often linked to local media conglomerates with particular ways of serving their long-standing national markets. So it's not a clear story, I don't think, that small is always beautiful with platforms. I think there's because with very large platforms, you have such a large range of content and expression on those platforms that it's the you can't equate the diversity of expression on those platforms with the political economy of those platforms. So yeah, just a few thoughts that have come out of our projects.